Okay, great. It being 6:30, I'll call to order meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education. Today is Monday, May 11th. We're at Dr. Bustler, Katie Heights, and myself are at the Oregon Innovation Center, and the remainder of the board is participating remotely. Prior to going live and calling the meeting to order, I've confirmed that each of the board members can hear me, and I can hear them here, and that we're broadcasting live over OCA Media and Facebook. All board members have copies of the packets, the materials that we are going to be working through tonight. Can you call the roll call, Ms. Heights?
Ms. Garrison?
Here.
Mr. Mary?
Here.
Oh,
Ms. Flanagan?
here.
Mr. Pankratz?
Here.
Ms. Bijak?
Here.
Mr. LeBrun?
Here.
Mr. Zak?
Present. Board has a quorum. The agenda tonight contains our normal agenda items. We do have a public hearing and action item related to waiver of minutes and for teacher evaluations, educator evaluations. We also have an action item with respect to graduation for 2020, discussion item committee reports, and then several informational items, and then a closed session to confer with legal counsel regarding negotiation of a service agreement for potential middle school site with the Village of Oregon and City of Fitchburg pursuant to Wisconsin statute section 1985-1E and 1985-1G, and then the discussion regarding potential land purchase within the school district pursuant to Wisconsin statute 1985-1E. We will have that at the end of the meeting, and we will not be returning from closed session at the end of the meeting. That's our agenda as posted. The meeting notice contains the what's become our standard COVID-19 language with respect to the public's ability to connect in with this meeting. We also have a physical location at the Innovation Center where members of the public can come and sit live if they would like. With that, I would need a motion to approve the agenda as posted.
I'll move the agenda.
Mr. LeBrun, was there a second?
I'll second. This is Anna.
Anna with the second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Mary?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Mr. Zak?
Yes, agenda is approved. That takes us to item A under the consent calendar. Is there any item that any board member wishes removed? And is there any item that any board member wishes removed? Okay, hearing no, I noticed that Troy sent in a couple of spelling corrections to the minutes. Those will be incorporated into the minutes if they're adopted. I need a motion to approve the consent calendar items as listed.
So moved. This is Troy.
Is there a second?
I'll second. This is Anna Bijak.
Anna with a second. Can you call the roll, Ms. Heights?
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Mary?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Zak?
Yes. Consent calendar items are approved. Takes us to agenda item B, information items. Ms. Heights, did we receive any comments from the public regarding any agenda items? Okay, she indicates we have not, so we'll move to 2 OEA report. Laura or anyone, are you on?
Yes, no report.
Great, thank you. And then we're having our regular meeting on Wednesday. with the leaders, correct?
Yes.
Okay, look forward to talking with you then. Hey, Cubby, you're up. I hear you have some guests tonight.
I do, yeah.
Okay, cool. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Not much to report from me. AP testing did begin today for many of our OHS students. These tests will be conducted digitally over the course of the next 2 weeks. like you said, I do have a few guests with me today. I have Chloe Jacobson and Andrew Palmer. Last week, they were voted to be the student council presidents for the upcoming school year. And it's my hope that they will be able to serve as the student reps on this board like Jenna and I did. I just thought I would invite them to see how our meetings are conducted online.
Terrific. Andrew, are you online?
I am. I'm right here. I think there's my camera. There we go.
There you go. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome. Why don't you give us a quick background on who you are and what you're about?
I'm Andrew. I'm going to be a rising senior. I am an Eagle Scout and I play baseball at the high school, as well as I'm involved in multiple clubs like German Club, Model U, and Swing Dance Club, Math Club, and things like that.
Terrific. Well, congratulations on your election. Chloe, are you on board?
Thank you.
I am, yes.
Okay. Hey, hi.
Hello, my name is Chloe Jacobson. I'll be a senior at OHS. I'm on the high school dance team. I'm the captain of the dance team this coming year. And then I also dance at A Leap Above in Oregon. So
Terrific. Well, congratulations too on your election. We look forward to working with you next year. You got big shoes to fill from our reps this year. They did a terrific job. We look forward to working with you, and hopefully we can do that physically present here at the Innovation Center. So
hope so,
I will
yes.
be in touch with you as we work through transition, okay? Good. Anything else, Cubby?
That's it for me.
Are you going to be talking on our graduation thing?
Yes, that's the plan.
Okay, great. That completes our student report. That takes us to see a public hearing and action item. And so at this point in time, I'll convene our public hearing pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 11838(1)B regarding the submission of a request to the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction to waive the minimum number of hours of instruction set forth in Wisconsin Statute 121.021F for the 2019-2020 school year, and to waive the requirement of Wisconsin Statute 121.021Q related to the evaluation in writing the performance of all certified personnel at the end of their first year and at least every third year thereafter for the 2019-2020 school year due to the ongoing COVID-19 public health emergency and school closure order. Gina, do you want to do a quick introduction into this before I ask if we've had any written or recorded comments regarding this?
Certainly. So this is a procedure that's required by law. As you know, DPI regulates that we have to have a certain number of instructional hours for students, as well as regulates our evaluation process for staff who are licensed by DPI. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic and schools having to close, we were not able to meet our required number of instructional hours, even though we are doing distance learning for our students. Additionally, we have a very rigorous educator evaluation process that we do. And so we were working towards those goals, but with having to end the year near the end of third quarter, not all of those were able to be completed. And so what we are asking the public and recommending that the board approve is a resolution asking DPI to waive those two requirements. And DPI has signaled to us that they will do so after we have a public hearing and should the board approve a resolution.
Thank you. And as I understand, this has become almost universal action taken by districts across the state of Wisconsin.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Because this is a public hearing and we're in a little different forum, we're following advice of Wisconsin Association of School Boards and the Department of Public Instruction and the manner in which we hold the public hearing. Is that right, Gina?
Yes, that is correct. They have provided this guidance to school districts across the state as a way to hold a public hearing and provide input, but also keep people safe and healthy and comply with the safe at home order.
Okay. And I would note for the record that there are no members of the public that are present here to provide comments. And Ms. Heitz is just double checking on that for the public hearing. So she will be back in a minute. There's no one here for that purpose. And Ms. Heights, do we have any written or recorded comments relative to the public hearing topic?
No, we do not.
Okay. And I think with that, it's your recommendation, Gina, on behalf of the administration to approve the waiver of both the minimum hours and the evaluation performance for certified personnel.
Yes, it is.
Okay. I think with that, it's appropriate for me then at this point to close the public hearing and move to item C2. And that would be the consideration and action on the resolution for a request for DPI waiver to waive the minimum number of hours of instruction pursuant to statute and to waive the requirement related to the evaluation in writing of the performance of all certified personnel. Gina, do you have anything more to add? Otherwise, I'll open it up to questions from the board.
The only thing that I would add is that in terms of the evaluation process, that for those individuals where we were not able to complete the process or where the educator had asked for additional coaching, we have worked with each individual teacher that was on the summary year for this year to talk about continuing that process into the fall. So I just want everyone to be operating from that same pool of knowledge that this doesn't mean the evaluations are complete, that we will be continuing that process into the fall until the evaluator and the educator feel that it was a meaningful and complete process.
Does any member of the board have any questions of Gina with respect to this item?
It's Krista. I have one. I just want to make sure it's clear that we are not pushing back other evaluations. So since for next year, it would be the ones we didn't finish plus the ones that are due next year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other board member have a question?
Yeah, Gina, oh, go ahead, Anna.
Go ahead. Well, you go ahead, Heather.
I just had a question if you know that if any other districts are not doing this, are you aware of any?
I'm not aware of it. I think it would be very unusual for a district to be able to complete all of its legal requirements by March. And when I talk to WASB, they don't represent every school district in Wisconsin, but the vast majority of them they do provide advice to, and they don't have all of their districts are doing this process as well.
Got it. Thank you.
In an article that I read earlier today, some 65% or so had already lined up for this this type of action. But again, that could be a few days old. And I too have heard that most districts, I haven't heard of any that are not going down this path.
Heather, do you have any more questions? Okay, Anna, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just have two. The first, I guess, is do we have an estimate? I'm just curious of how many instructional hours we do have leading up to the Safer at Home and the closing of schools relative to what these annual numbers are? Do we know that?
So I would say we were almost through third quarter. So at least 3/4 of our hours were complete, but I can give you an exact number tonight if you'd like that, Anna.
I don't need an exact, I guess, I mean, that pretty much gives me a good standing point. And then, I guess there's really no way to quantify the remote virtual learning process of how many hours of instruction, because we're providing the instruction and the expectation is that students are checking in and continuing their education, but it's not in a traditional format and there's not really a way to quantify that. So I would support this approach from the standpoint that we are in uncharted territory and it seems like a reasonable thing to do. I do have one question about the evaluation being on hold. You mentioned that this year's evaluations, so there must be a staggering of how many educators are evaluated each year. I don't know much about that. What does that look like? And then I guess so I'm just curious how many teachers this impacts. And then as a follow-up to that, if we are aware of some performance issues, I would hope that those are going to be addressed without a formal evaluation process, but continue to work on a performance improvement plan if necessary, or provide constructive, good feedback so that our teachers have opportunities for that improvement, even without a formal evaluation.
Absolutely. So I will start with your question, and then I will turn it over to Dr. Bergstrom so she can add what I may miss. So in terms of evaluation, we evaluate every teacher who is new to us in the first and the second year of employment. So it doesn't mean you're a first or second year teacher, it's those teachers new to us. And then DPI and state law requires that we evaluate every 3 years thereafter. So in any given year, at least a third of our staff are on evaluation. And that also includes not just our educators that are licensed, or excuse me, that are part of the OEA bargaining unit, but also anyone licensed by DPI. So also our administrators and our licensed non-represented staff. So in any current year, we would have at least, I would say, 125 folks on evaluation. So it is a very significant part of an administrator's job, and one of the priorities for our administrative staff to go through that rigorous and pretty intensive evaluation process. And so if we had any performance concerns as part of the evaluation process or outside of the evaluation process, because even if it's not your summary year, we are still working with educators, and I'll turn that over to Dr. Bergstrom, but those would be identified, and those educators would be on plans of improvement. So Dr. Bergstrom, what would you like to add?
Well, that was an excellent summary. So I'm not sure I have anything to add to it, but I'm certainly willing to answer any questions that people may have based on anything you've said.
That answers my questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Other board member? Okay, I don't hear any more questions, so what I would need would be a motion to approve a request or for us to adopt a resolution to request DPI for a waiver due to COVID-19 public health emergency, to waive the minimum number of hours of instruction set forth in statute, and to waive the requirement in statute relating to the evaluation and writing of the performance of all certified personnel at the end of their first year and at least every third year thereafter for the 2019-2020 school year. So I would need a motion to that effect.
I'll move approval. It's Krista.
There's a second.
I'll second. It's Tim.
Is there any discussion?
Steve, is there any reason why these should be separated?
Gina?
Yeah, so the questions that we have to answer for DPI require us to separate them.
So we just need two motions then, right?
Correct.
Okay, so the first motion would be to approve a resolution on request for DPI waiver due to the COVID-19 health emergency, to waive the minimum number of hours of instruction set forth in WSStat 121.021F for the 2019 school year. That would be our first motion. Can we do a friendly amendment? Who made the motion?
Me, Krista.
Krista, would you agree that to amend your motion to include just that portion of what we had read before?
Yes.
Okay, and then the second was from?
Yes, from Tim.
Agree that
I agree.
motion to that? Okay.
Yes.
So everybody's on board that the motion and second on the table are just for to adopt a resolution to request the waiver for the minimum number of hours of instruction. With respect to that, is there any discussion? Could you call the roll?
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Maring?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Bouchard?
Yes.
Mr. Zak?
Yes, that motion carries by a 7-0 vote, and I will sign it along with Krista, that resolution. Okay, we need a second motion then to waive the requirement in WSStat 121.021Q relating to the evaluation and writing of the performance of certified personnel for the 2019-2020 school year, and to authorize the resolution to be submitted to DPI for that purpose. Is there a motion to that effect?
This is Anna. I move approval.
Is there a second?
Heather, I'll second.
Heather with a second. Is there any discussion? Ms. Heights, could you call the roll?
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Maring?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Zak?
Yes, motion carries 7-0, and again, we'll execute the appropriate paperwork to submit that resolution. That completes item C on the agenda. Moving to action item D, that's graduation 2020, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Bussler.
Board members, what we have for your consideration this evening is a joint recommendation that Mr. Pliner and Cubby put together along with Jenna for your consideration. Again, it breaks our heart that we're not able to have a graduation planned and scheduled on our regular date on June 14th. We have a couple of path forwards with it, and we'd like to share those with you. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Pliner and Cubby. And I didn't see if Jenna was on, so she is on. Thank you.
I'm on.
So have the floor.
Good evening, everybody. You can imagine there have been a lot of questions around how we can honor our seniors and wrap up the school year in a way that that really celebrates their accomplishments. We have been, since we have gotten the word that schools will not reopen during the course of the school year, it has really been clear to us that a gathering on June 14th was not in the cards as a possibility. And as we talked in our admin team around ways in which we could engage students in the conversation, and really parents have been approaching me as well, we worked with our student leadership. So I've met several times with Cubby, Jenna, and we have Nora McGinty and Tori have also Tori Phillips have also been in conversation, and they've been liaisons between our conversations and the student body at large. And what was really clear to us, I guess I'm gonna turn it over to Cubby to share a couple of elements about those conversations and what really emerged from our talks. Cubby, go right ahead. And Jenna.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the message that I really received was, us students really valued, actually being able to gather together one last time. Actually being physically together was it was a priority for us. And so while being together in a physical sense may not be viable, we think that we hold it in really high regard, and we're hoping to be able to do something in person. But that was the message that really hit home to me.
Jenna, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. So, oops, just gotta clean my camera. So we actually surveyed some of the senior students, and like Cubby said, their main concern was being in person, because throughout high school, like, we've grown so much together. So as everyone knows, this is a closing moment. So above, like getting to that June 14th date, I'm sure from what we heard, everyone would rather gather at a later date and close together.
So our group are very wonderful. They also, they're hopeful, but certainly know that if the phase plan does not permit us to get together, we would love to hold on to hope that later in the summer we could have a graduation ceremony or some modified celebration to that effect. In the conference, we have a 16 school conference, and so far 10 schools have decided to postpone until a later date in the summer. 2 are still weighing their options, and 4 are proceeding with virtual graduation ceremonies on their scheduled dates. Today, and Katie, I can't really see. I'm trying to see if I can see that screen. Essentially, what we're asking the board to consider is we would like to postpone our date of graduation ceremony until July 26th, which is a Sunday, late July. That gives us time to wait to see what the phase plan will allow for us to do. And it also buys us time to modify plans in a way that really allows us to get together in some fashion if possible. And if it becomes clear that that is not in the cards, it will give us an opportunity to plan the very best virtual ceremony that we can. What questions do you have based on hearing what we brought forward today?
Anyone from the board have a question of Mr. Pliner or our student reps?
It's Krista. I have a couple. I feel terrible about this too. I mean, this is nothing anybody would have expected. I guess my questions are, being in the event industry, I'm seeing out into the future too, in terms of when mass gatherings are happening. And in our event industry, I do a major event in December, and that's probably canceled. So at what point in time are you saying, I guess, what are you asking for us from tonight? Are we saying we approve? Do you need our approval for July 26th? Or at what point will you make a decision that that's not feasible? What's the date, kind of the cutoff date where you say, okay, July 26th is not going to be feasible?
It's difficult for me to predict. We do know that as weeks pass, we'll get more information and more guidance, which will make it clear for us. We're beginning to get from the public health department feedback that specifically is pointing to graduation, and it is certainly discouraging us to plan significant in-person gatherings of any type. But they did crack the door for curbside celebrations. And I guess what we're asking is if we could wait a little longer and see what information evolves over the course of time. If it is not realistic, I think it will become more and more clear to us as we get closer to mid-June. And I think then we'll begin planning for whatever is in our future.
Thank you.
So what I understand you're asking for is for board action just to formally cancel the June graduation date and set it for July 26th, and then let the administration work on the plans for what July 26th looks like. It would either be virtual or some modified form of in-person graduation.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Any board members have any questions about that? One question I have is, to what extent have we vetted the July 26th date in terms of graduates' availability that day?
We have not formally surveyed families or released any notification that is a possibility. I'm working essentially through my student leadership who have been working kind of the students and have received feedback through their communication channels that students would warmly receive the possibility of gathering, even if it means that it's later in the summer. I've also, just anecdotally, I've received dozens of emails from parents who've asked us to consider that very thing. They know people in other districts that have either pushed it out and they have reacted favorably to that action, and they're asking us to do the same thing.
Cubby or Jenna, anything with respect to the specific date of July 26th in terms of your classmates' availability that day?
Not that I can think of.
Cubby?
None for me. This is an assumption, but I I don't believe that there would be a whole lot of traveling going on this summer. Again, that's an assumption. But I haven't heard much.
Okay. So the request, board members, is for a motion to postpone graduations from the June date until Sunday, July 26th.
I guess I have a question, Steve. Are we officially designating July 26th, or are we just postponing it sometime into the future? I mean, could it be considered early August or some other date,
Jim?
depending on how the Safer at Home plays out?
So that date was selected by our admin team just as a target. We, I think we have to pick something to shoot for, and then we've got to kind of take a look at what information comes out. It is, to be honest with you, if we are unable to hit that date, it's going to force us to really work on our virtual ceremony. And speaking to Leslie today, I said, if our class can gather in December in some form or format after we have already had a virtual ceremony, we'll plan a celebration of some sort for the class of 2020. It's just our hope. I know that the feedback that I'm getting from students is they want to hold on to hope that we can get together. And if we get the sense that delaying it a few weeks from July 26th would make a difference, I guess we would make that decision at that point in time.
Any other questions? So Jim, what I'm understanding is that you would like us to adopt a motion delaying the graduation from June and with a target date of July 26.
That's correct.
Okay. So I would need that motion.
This is Anna. I would make a motion that we postpone the June, 14th graduation date to July 26th, and with the potential of that to be reconsidered as evolving changes come our way.
Okay, the motion is to postpone the June 14th graduation and to set the date for July 26th with the direction to administration to monitor and proceed accordingly. Is there a second to that motion?
This is Heather. I'll second that.
Is there any discussion? I know we've been trying hard on our end to try to facilitate some sort of in-person graduation on the June 14th date, whether it be in automobiles or otherwise. And it became clear as we were moving forward that the Safer at Home order was not going to permit us to do even that sort of function. So I think as things evolve, I think this is regrettably the best way to go to give students at least the hope of having some sort of ceremony that closes their high school career in person in some form or another, as opposed to just totally virtual. Although that may be what it ends up to be depending on the course of things.
Hey Steve, this is Kevin. Point of clarification on the motion. The terminology is gonna say a target date of July 26th, correct? To give them flexibility if for some reason they might need that flexibility.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And we need to get a date out there, I think, for people to start planning.
Yeah,
But
it'd
recognizing
be
that,
important to have terminology that it's a targeted date in case they need flexibility, so we don't have to go on it again.
Yeah, that would be the intent of my motion. So I would agree to that. Yeah.
great. And who was our second? Heather, you'd agree to making sure that the motion has target date for July 26th?
Yep, this sounds good.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, Katie, would you call the roll?
Ms. Bujak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Heather? She's gone.
Mr. Mary?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Zach?
Yes. Heather, are you still with us?
I wasn't, but I am now. I mean, I popped off for a second. I'm having some technology, but yes, I'm here and yes.
Great, thank you. Got everybody?
And then just wait, because in about 10 minutes, my kids are going to come downstairs. So this will be excellent.
Thank you. Discussion items, number E. Thank you, by the way, Jim, Cubby and Jenna for your work on this and trying to facilitate the best sort of closing ceremony that we can give our high school seniors.
We appreciate you all taking these steps tonight, and we'll keep you updated on what goes on as the summer nears.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
That takes us to discussion item E, committee reports. I will confirm in final form the appointment of committees. I've spoken with folks since our last meeting. Visioning will be Troy as chair, Krista and Kevin, and policy will be Anna chair with Tim and Heather. Okay, and with that, I don't know that there's anything to report at this point in time. I've spoken with both chairs and I'll talk with you further this week about processing ahead, okay?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to quickly just mention is that I wanted to give Gina and Krista a heads up that I'd like to schedule a Teams call or a Google Hangout to kind of pass the baton, get me up to speed on what things you were working on, and for me to start understanding, what are those items on that list, and start working through some of those just for that transition. So I'll likely be reaching out to both of you to just set something up so that the three of us can talk.
Great, thank you, Anna. Troy, anything on your end for visioning chair?
No, we haven't met in the past 2 weeks, but we do need to meet soon. So I'll reach out to Kevin and Krista to get something scheduled.
Thank you. That takes us to item F, informational items. Number 1 is distance learning update, and I think that's Leslie and John.
Correct.
You guys are on.
All right. So the update is not very different from before. We haven't had any huge changes in our practices other than we've had 2 of the Fridays, which some people are calling the Finish Up Friday model, where there's not new learning being assigned. Instead, it's a time where teachers use that mostly for collaboration and planning as they revise the curriculum for the remainder of the school year, and students are given the opportunity to finish up work that they didn't get done during the week, possibly. It's also a time for collaboration or consultation between teachers and students. And so far, the anecdotal feedback is that that has gone very well. So we have some good news from teachers that they're being able to meet. It's provided another day with options where they don't have to have scheduled office hours because there's a lot more time spent in meetings now to collaborate with people. And so that's been going pretty well. We're also just working on finalizing our reporting standards for the end of the year and how that's going to look, because there are some things that we, like for example, work skills. It would be kind of silly to do too much feedback on work skills of students since the students are at home, they're not with us. So we can tell if they get their work done, but we can't always tell how long it's taking them or if they're on task. And frankly, their parents who are at home would probably be have an easier time assessing that. So there's some tweaks that we're making, but obviously, as you know, the high school and middle school are going to the pass-fail model. And so we're working with that. The principals and their leadership teams are rolling that out and providing clarification. And our instructional coaches and Leslie and I have been working with the teachers in the various grade levels to figure out what kind of comments are going to be provided as teachers report back to the students and families on report cards about basically the learning that happened up until March 13th, and then the learning that happened since then. So that's basically it. That's kind of what we're working on. Leslie, what else?
Just to build off what you said regarding report cards, I think it's important to note that there was only about 5 weeks in between when the elementary report card was mailed and when we went into closure. So parents with the semester 1 elementary report card have a real clear snapshot as to where their children are. And then the time since then, we'll do the best we can to reflect what we know on the report card. But remember, the K2 students, they had work mailed to them, but they weren't necessarily mailing the work back to us. Consequently, assessment of our youngest learners is a challenge in this format. And it's something we're talking about moving forward, because if we find ourselves in this situation again, we are planning to have our youngest learners also have access to devices so that we can see the work they're doing and give them feedback on the work they're doing, which is really, you know, what eventually leads to the end of the year or end of semester report card.
Do any board members have questions of John or Leslie about distance learning?
Just, I know that we reflected, this is Tim, we reflected a little bit on, just a sense of the level of engagement that we're getting from the students now that we're using distant learning. Do you have any update on that continued level of engagement more recently?
Only what I have heard from conversations with teachers, not from specific surveys that have been sent out. Although I know each of our schools is keeping data on students and their contact with them and whether or not work is coming in. So schools would certainly be able to give you more specific information. But from what I'm hearing, it stays pretty steady with the students who really like this format doing really well, and the students who are always the people who will do whatever was asked of them, even if they don't like the format, doing really well. And then the students who were struggling with engagement previously are still struggling with engagement. And that doesn't mean they're not making connections. It just means that they're having a hard time doing the work without the supports that they're used to, because our supports look a little bit different now.
Any other questions, Tim?
Leslie, do you find in general that educators are able to reach out in person to the students in their classes, or is it mostly over email? Mostly over email.
I think a lot of that depends on the preference. We would not video call a student without a pre-authorized appointment, meaning parents are aware and everybody knows what's happening. Otherwise, the first contact would always be through email. And if students are comfortable and parents are comfortable, then the subsequent contacts could be video conferencing. And
Thank you, Leslie.
You bet.
Go ahead. Tim, anything more?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Leslie, have you begun to think about assessment when we get back into some form of brick and mortar format and seeing where we're at in terms of progression or regression of students?
Yes, actually, and I have some of that information coming up tonight in the superintendent's report regarding all the planning we're doing for the fall, and a little bit of that in the upcoming summer school presentation.
Okay, great. So we'll hold off on that. Anybody else have any questions of John or Leslie regarding the distance learning update?
Yeah, I have one question, I guess, budgetary question regarding the going to a one-to-one device for the K2 students. Is that investment? Where is that coming from? I guess because I assume that's not something that we had planned for prior to the COVID-19 situation.
Mhm. Well, it depends a lot upon the model that we use, meaning there are several possibilities. And so first, what we decided to do as a committee is speak about what exactly is it that we would want to do, how would we utilize the device, and then which device would be best for that purpose. And then we have a couple of different options regarding utilization of things that we already have and supplementing with new and additional. So there are a lot of options that are on the table right now. So I can't give the exact cost, but that's exactly what the committee is working through. And we have ordered a few Chrome tablets, a newer device that we are testing out with young students and with teachers, ideally teachers who have young students, because that way we can test it out in one household with two different user groups to see what will work best for our youngest students and their smaller hands and the needs that they have at the moment, which are very different from a student who's in an older grade.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board member have questions of John or Leslie?
I just have one more question. Just out of curiosity, as we consider, being prepared for the event that this occurs again, and going out and purchasing additional hardware, where does that usually? Where do those funds usually come from? Are those funds? Yeah, where do those typically come from?
John, would you like to talk about this? Because this is connecting both of his wheelhouses, technology and instruction.
Yeah, so the funds, Brian's fond of saying we all have one budget, so it's not like there's different budgets. However, the traditional way, sorry, it gets a little complicated. We've transitioned in the past few years because the technology budget traditionally was for sort of one desktop per classroom. And schools use building funds, usually accumulated through carryover. They would carry over funds for multiple years in order to save up enough for one big purchase of devices. And that's how most of the iPads and Chromebooks and everything got purchased. A few years ago, that model was not a really great model because it was very difficult to plan. And we ran into the problem of all of a sudden having large chunks of money having to be spent in a particular year to replace equipment that was cycling out of its life cycle. So what we started doing is we created basically just a budget model in which, well, first of all, we established it only for grades 3 through 8. And Josh Weiss and Kevin May did a ton of work looking at basically the inventory, the fleet, trying to coordinate because we have, over 3,000 devices, and looking at how many devices needed to be replaced each year and figuring out a way to provide the one-to-one for grades 3 through 8. And the reason we chose those grades were because that made the most sense based on the learning needs for those students. Also, it worked out fairly well as far as the way our grades are distributed. So it ended up being taking a per student allocation each year out of each school's tier budget that gets earmarked to a Chromebook budget line item, so that every school pays a per student cost every year, even though every student doesn't get a new device every year. It was the only really predictable budget way to do it. That way, every school can have a predictable budget amount every year, and they're not saving up funds for like 4 years in order to get a big lump sum to be able to buy something for the next year. So to be able to do that it's required flexibility from the building principals, but it also provides predictability from a budget standpoint. So that's where the money has come from. It is basically, instead of being some from district funds and some from building funds, it's been all managed by the tech department, who can also build in the total cost of ownership of the devices over, a 4 or 5 year lifespan or whatever it ends up being. So every year they revisit the amount, because it includes things like licensing fees and warranties and all that stuff, and then divide it up and figure out a per student cost, and it gets taken out of the tier budgets for each school. So as we look at K2, there's a few things at play. It would likely be, eventually we would want the similar model where we have a predictable budgeting cycle that you can count on for, more or less a flat fee, or at least a per student fee every year. Now there's a transition period to get to that, just as there was a transition period that we used to get where we are now. But eventually it would make sense to be something along that same model. The variables keep changing. For example, Chromebooks used to be on a 3-year life cycle. Now they're up to like a 5-year life cycle, and it looks like they might be up to a 6-year life cycle soon, which means that obviously the annual cost would go down. Conversely, though, the cost per device has gone up as their capabilities get higher and their features get more. So, just more features in them. There's also the management capabilities and things like that. So it kind of remains to be seen, because the more you take out of the building tier budgets, the less they have for other things they typically use the tier budgets on. So we don't want to hamstring the schools, but it was just kind of the only way for the tech budget at the time. The number of devices in the district had gone up about 400%, and the budget had basically remained pretty much stagnant. So it was necessary to find a different funding source, and because schools had already been allocating building funds to it, it just made sense to keep doing that, but to make it more predictable for everybody involved. Does that answer the question?
It does. Yes, I appreciate you going through your thought process. So, because I did have follow-up questions around life cycle, both cost as well as term, and you've answered all those questions. So I appreciate that. Thank you, John.
No problem.
Thanks, John. Any board member have any other questions of Leslie or John?
This is Heather. I have a quick question. I have a first grader, so this is, I guess, specifically appropriate to that. But have parents or teachers been asking for this? I know you said you were testing it with potentially teachers and those who have young kids, but can you talk a little bit about what it does to make it easier for the learner or for the parent or for the teacher? I guess since I'm in that group that doesn't have it yet, I don't know what makes it better or more helpful.
Would you like to start, John, or would you like me to?
I can give it a shot, and if you can augment. Hopefully not correct, hopefully augment. Yeah, that's a good question. One of the reasons why we've only done grades 3 through 8 so far, and we didn't go into the K2, was so much of the learning that we do for the K2 level, we have a real big emphasis on experiential learning, play-based learning, hands-on activities, and a lot of those things are best done without a lot of technology, and so just the nature of how it's used is different. So that's philosophically been our standpoint in the past, and so there is technology in those classrooms. However, it hasn't been Chromebooks, partially because students' hands are pretty small. Kindergartners who don't necessarily know all their letters, asking them to log into something is a very frustrating endeavor. And so that hasn't made a lot of sense. Second grade is where there's more use, but we haven't gone one-to-one there. And typically in the younger grades, they've used things like iPads, where they either have stations for students to use learning support applications, or apps that do some, skill practice, or they've used it to, say, take pictures of their environment, and or using applications like Seesaw, where they can take photos of their work and then share it up with parents. So it's a great portfolio communication tool, and that's been great because they can share those really easily. what's changed our thinking is the difficulty that we had this year, and the frustration of the teachers for, the kindergarten, first and second graders, where they literally had almost no way of communicating with a lot of the families, as I'm sure you know from being a parent of a first grader. It was very difficult for the teachers. And so while we understand that technology is often not the best way to learn for those age groups, it's better than nothing. And it was also very difficult as we were mailing packets out to younger students. We're mailing it out, but we're not getting it back. I mean, we didn't ask for it back, but in the situation becomes a very big logistical problem as well. Because even if we gave prepaid stamped envelopes to people to send things back, it would come back to the school district office, and then we would have to somehow get that back to the teachers. And if we weren't in a pandemic, boy, that would be really convenient. But right now, that's just not a great way to be distributing a lot of paper things to people. So we started looking at the technology aspect because it would be a lot easier for those who have internet access to be able to do that back and forth communication. And it may be primarily with the parents of those students, not necessarily the students directly. It kind of depends on the age level. But what we're hoping to do from a strategic perspective is to have devices that those young students will become accustomed to, so that if this happens again, which we're kind of planning it will, hopefully for a lot shorter time than this time, we can send those devices home and students will already be familiar with them so that they can log in. That's also why we're looking at different devices. iPads have been used in those elementary buildings, but iPads are very difficult to manage from an IT perspective, and so they really prefer something that's managed the same way, which is why we've looked at, the tech department has bought a few of those Chrome tablets, because the tablet interface is real easy for the little hands and they don't know typing yet. But the Chrome part means that they can be managed the same way that Chromebooks are, so we can have a consistent feel. For example, we can push the apps out to them pretty easily so that we can get whatever the specific applications they need when they're already at home. We can push those out. So that's the idea for why we would do it. It may not be optimal, but we're trying to plan ahead for this, for suboptimal circumstances in the future.
Gotcha. Thanks. I was just wanted to learn more so I could better understand the benefit versus the cost.
Any other questions?
Steve, I have one. This kind of goes to the engagement question that Tim asked that I asked last time too, and to your assessment question and looking at what we're learning right now and transferring it to summer school as well as the fall. So when I look at assessment, I look at engagement, academic process, and then kind of this anxiety, both from a parent and a child perspective, because what we're hearing too is there's a lot of anxiety with parents right now, maybe more so than kids, but that is being transferred to kids. And so with the contact data reports that you're getting or surveys that you are potentially doing, you're going to learn a lot, right? And so I'm wondering if we're going to this distance learning model of summer school too, or even now to the end of the year, do we need to be investing more in or transferring staff to this engagement or teaching parents? So having it, not only are we teaching kids, but we're teaching parents how to help their kids in a distance learning environment. Because on Facebook, or what I hear from people is there's a ton of parent stress right now about they don't know how to help their kids. And so as we continue to help kids learn, if we're not helping parents learn how to help their kids learn, we're still going to have the same issues, if that makes any sense. So I guess I'm just interested in your thoughts on that and how we can really not only help kids from an academic and emotional standpoint, but help their parents help them and help themselves.
Part of putting together, we have an academic planning team that we're just forming to make sure that we get representation from all the different groups. We've heard the same feedback. It's true, parents can be it can be pretty frustrating, and we've heard that. So we're trying to do a few things, and we haven't finalized all of this yet. But one thing that we've heard is there's just too many different options, and so we're going to be proactive about reducing the number of different things that people have to use. So we've been talking with those school leadership teams about moving to a single learning management system, or maybe two, because, for example, Seesaw can be used not only as a portfolio product, but also as a learning management system, like basically a way for teachers to easily send assignments to students who are in like K1, 2, and then easily get those back from students. Whereas Google Classroom works really well for most of the other grades. So that's one example of how we're trying to move it down, or move to a single item. Also the communication apps that are used, because we've heard from parents that, I'm getting emails, I'm getting, I have to go to this website, I have to log into this thing. And so we're also, actually before any of this started back last fall, we were looking at trying to consolidate the number of communication apps that we had to make a standard couple, depending on the use, for communicating with parents. So we're doing that. We've also started to, and this is, we don't have this yet, but we're looking at, once we establish what those are, do parent-friendly documentation for all of it, and offer basically on-demand training, like videos and things like that for parents. There have been a few that have been out there, like the ITLTs, like Velvet Homes, published a Google Classroom for Parents slide deck that was out there. And I don't know how widely that got distributed, but as we've gotten questions, we've been referring people to that, and we'd like to have something similar for all the different areas that we're doing. So Erica has been working on documentation for the Welcome to Kindergarten event, which will be virtual this year. And part of that is, how do you use Infinite Campus to set up your contact preferences? And so we've been updating the documentation for that, thinking, hey, this will be great because now we can roll this out to others as well. So those are some of the things that we're doing. And that academic planning team to look at the fall is basically going to be in charge of looking at the parent component as well to figure that out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Leslie. Thanks, John, for bringing us up to speed on where we're at on the distance learning. Item F, 2020 summer school update. Leslie, is that you?
That is me again, and Katie will bring up one slide that just has a few bullet points that accentuate some of the points that I was making in the purple that you have all received. So basically, we know that in the past, our summer school goals have always been the idea of learning enrichment, or maintenance of skills, or learning or credit recovery, or credit attainment, even at the high school level. And we plan to maintain those goals because that has led to a very successful summer school program. 2,000 Oregon School District learners, 88 different classes. So it's a robust program. And despite the fact that we're in very challenging circumstances, we want to be able to keep as much of that as is possible. So summer school for this summer, which will be July 6th through July 31st, will be in a virtual format or a distance learning format. And we would much rather be with our students face-to-face. We just don't know at this point whether or not we can plan on that. And I'll get to potential opportunities for that in just a moment. So registration for the classes will open in June. We surveyed teachers, and the vast majority of them believe that they can find a way to offer the course via distance learning. And we think that those 4 weeks could prove to be very valuable weeks as we take what we've learned this spring and make some changes, test some things out, so that if we find ourselves in this situation at some point in the future, we're able to lean a little more heavily into what we have discovered works best for our students and for our families. And then what we're really kind of holding out some hope for is that word comes in the next few weeks that potentially we could have small group face-to-face classes in August, meaning spread out and invitation classes for students that we know might need some extra support in entering into the school year, because we do expect that there will be a learning regression for a lot of students particularly students who haven't been able to participate in some of the distance learning opportunities that have been offered this spring. And we have a large concern for our youngest learners who are just learning their foundational numeracy and literacy skills, and anything that we can do to get them face-to-face in small groups in August, we will take advantage of that opportunity. But we know that will only be, we will only offer what the state allows us to offer, because safety is always the primary goal for this. So to sum it up, we will have summer school with the same goals for the month of July. And we will find out basically in registration in June how many of our parents will be interested in taking part of that in that opportunity. And then over the course of the next few weeks, if we find out that small group face-to-face are possible, then we will be getting that together for at least 2 weeks of the month of August. And we think that would be a really nice way to learn where our students are before the school year starts. Not all of them, but just enough so that we can plan very thoughtfully forward and make sure that all the supports that are necessary are in place. And as John mentioned, as part of our planning for the fall, and I'll talk more about this later, but we will have an academic planning team that will be meeting to talk about what supports need to be in place to ensure we are meeting students just as we always try to, but we know the needs will be very great this fall, meeting students where they are and moving them forward. And that's not just academically, but social emotionally also. So all of that is in the planning stages.
Any questions of Leslie about summer school?
This is Anna. I just have a couple of quick questions. As far as the fee structure goes, will those remain similar to what they've been in the past, or will it be different because we aren't using a facility or we aren't having maybe the same level of expenses? So that's one question, if that's been thought about, just curious. Secondly, if this virtual process actually allows increased capacity in some of these, because some of the classes are fun, right? You know, learning to make chocolate and learning to do cool things that my kids have always wanted to do, and I've never been at the computer at the right second of the day. So I'm just wondering if that actually is a benefit in that it will increase capacity for kids to participate in some of those classes.
It certainly may. We have already surveyed the teachers who had proposed courses regarding whether or not they feel they could offer the course in a distance format. And the next set of questions would be, and how many students could you service in this format? And you're absolutely right. We may be able to increase the numbers in some of the classes. Related to cost, that hasn't been completely determined yet, because the cost is usually going toward consumable supplies. And so the consumable supplies, we would still want to offer that and even perhaps ship it in some circumstances. So I'm not necessarily sure if everything would go down. And Andy knows more about how much we charge for the courses and what we use it for, but that would be my first crack at answering your question. Do you want to add anything to that, Andy? Did I misstate anything?
No, we are still trying to figure out whether mailing costs would be something that we could even charge for. We're sending an email to DPI. They have very specific rules as to what we can charge for.
Got it. Okay. That's all those are, yeah, that answers my questions. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Any board member?
Leslie, I have a couple questions. You started talking about it with the consumables and just from an equity perspective of those who don't have it or those who have parents that can't help pull it together. I know a lot of the classes are those types of hands-on things. So I just was wondering, besides shipping it, like, is that going to be, are those classes still going to be offered? And have we surveyed parents about if they're interested in taking some of the, helping with some of these classes? Because I think there are some that you can't just be a student with a teacher, right? Like K through 2 or 3, there has to be some sort of supervision. And I'm just curious if we've explored parental interest in having children take remote summer school.
Well, I think we'll definitely find out whether or not parents are interested when registration comes around. And I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up with fewer students involved than we had in the past. Because I know there may be some families who would be very eager after a month off of school because they'll have the entire month of June off. There may be a lot of families that are very eager to dive right in. And there may be some families that really just want to turn that computer off for a while.
Right.
And both choices are very respected.
Got it. And then my final comment is, and I'm sorry that this is looking backwards, but as we talk about having graduation potentially on July 26th, it seems a little bit like a disconnect to be having distance learning summer school during that time. And I wonder if there's opportunity to tweak the graduation date to better align with a point in time where we are not purposefully doing distance learning.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing we know for certain, no, there aren't very many things we know for certain. Let me say that, right? There aren't very many things related to dates that we know for certain. But it is our best guess at the moment that in early July, we will not yet be able to get groups of students together in the school. And so that's why we decided to go for the distance learning format. Now, it would be wonderful to learn that we may be able to get groups of people together in August, because that would help us with face-to-face summer school classes in August. And maybe that also means that we then push out the potential graduation date that was put out there. We'd all be willing to push it out if it meant we could do something in person.
Right. I wasn't sure of the messaging externally of sharing when the time comes to share that date. It just seems to be in conflict when we look at summer school dates. But
Point taken, thank you.
Anything else out there?
Okay.
Any other board members? All
I
right.
would just make a point to Heather's point is that we're not saying that we're having an in-person graduation on July 26th. What we're saying is we're going to have some sort of graduation. And so I would hate for the message out there to be that we've said an in-person graduation is happening on July 6th, because that's not what we've said tonight.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else on summer school? Crystal, we're having a little hard time hearing you. Your volume's a little down, so if you can get a little closer.
Is that better?
Good. Hearing nothing on summer school, we'll go to F, establishing a long-term capital improvement trust fund, 46. Andy, I bet you that's you.
You are correct.
All right, the floor is yours. And this is just informational, right?
That is exactly my first point. No action is needed tonight. This is more of just a Q&A or see what type of questions you have for me this evening. Our hope would be to bring this back to you on June 15th, if you're so inclined to consider it for approval. So you bet. So what I'm proposing tonight is something that a lot of school districts have entertained and adopted, and it's kind of an additional financial tool that school districts have available. It's basically a trust fund, and we have one other trust fund segmented into two components for employee benefits. But this trust fund is specifically for capital maintenance projects. And it's become more important as our district has become more wealthy in the eyes of the school financial system. And we are starting to get into a position called a negative tertiary state aid. And what that unfortunately means is, and it kind of all works out, I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but as you spend additional funds, you receive a little bit less in state aid. And so it's important if you were to do large capital projects where you spend a significant amount of money that you could impact your state aid. And so you try to figure out a way to kind of smooth that out so that you don't have a certain impact in one particular year. This is a vehicle that allows you to do that because you can basically are allowed to expense the deposits that you put into the fund on a yearly basis. So it's not, your shared cost is not impacted by the expenditure, it's impacted by when you deposit the money into the fund. So you are in control then of when you deposit the money and how much you deposit the money on a yearly basis. So the hope would be, and one of the unfortunate issues and why I'm bringing it up at this time is that you can't spend money into that fund until you've established it and had it in place for 5 years. So if we could establish it before July 1st, then 2019, 2020 would be the first year, and we get the clock moving. We don't have to put a tremendous amount of money into the fund. There's not a requirement to do that, but you have to establish the fund. And then 5 years down the road, we could theoretically take our long-term capital projects that we have been spending now for 20 years and take the 600,000, or if it grows more, money into that fund on an annual basis and then work out of that fund in a particular year. It allows us to smooth out our expenditures, like I said before, because you're basically spending from the DPI's perspective the amount that you put into the fund. So if you have $1 million HVAC project or a roofing project, you're not going to have a larger expenditure in that one particular year because it's all based on how much you deposit into the fund. The only requirements to start the fund are basically approving a resolution, which if you're open to that, I would bring to you on June 15th. Having an approved long-term capital plan. That capital plan, I gave you a very quick draft of it in your packet. We will continue to build upon that over the next couple weeks so that you'll have that in a little bit more detail at that time. And then a segment, basically funds that are separated or segmented from our current other funds that we have in the district. Because it is a trust fund, so interest and all those things accrues to that fund rather than to the general fund. The funding source is the general fund. So the money would be coming from that. It's not outside of revenue limits or anything of that nature. So we would continue to fund that the way we have. We would also have the ability, if we wanted to for instance, if we had a particular good year for utilities or something of that nature, we could put excess funds into that. And the DPI and the law actually allows us to put funds into that after our fiscal year ends. So you can actually put funds into there through July 31st, even though our June 30th, sorry, July 31st, even though our fiscal year ends on June 30th. So with that information, what questions do you have for me?
Andy, the question I have, are the expenditures out of the Fund 46, then those don't count against the revenue limit?
No, they do count. They do count against the. It's not the expenditures. I'm sorry. It's only the revenues that are included within the revenue limit. So you're not getting around the revenue limit. But the shared cost, which is the state aid component of it, your shared cost is calculated based on the deposit into the fund, not the expenditure.
The expenditure.
Right.
It's going to give us more flexibility in terms of ability to get state aid as opposed to property tax.
It's going to give us more flexibility not to have a negative impact in large expenditures in any particular year, to lose more state aid than if we just spent the regular $600,000. I know this is complicated. I apologize. I'm not explaining it better, but
No. It gives us budget flexibility down the line on the revenue side of the formula.
Yep.
Because what's only going to be counted against us in that year is the contribution into the fund, not the expenditure. So if we have to spend $1 million, we don't get that hit. We only get hit like 600.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
So, and is there any minimum deposit that's required in year 1 through 5 to create that?
Not that I've seen in the statute or in the DPI guidelines, no.
Okay, so that gives us some budget room right now to do that, and then what we could do is start moving as we get into year 5, the significant portion of our $600,000.
Correct. I would suggest that we look at things at the end of this fiscal year, and if we want to make a minimal deposit, we can. We don't necessarily have to, that I can see, but it might be something to put a couple $1,000s in just to start the account.
So I'm looking at the draft. This is just the beginning stage of a Fund 46 plan that we've got, the spreadsheet.
Correct.
I just have one question. Is the middle school capital plan for the chillers, is that really $1 million?
Yeah, we are assessing that. We spent a little bit of time looking at a study on that. The most efficient way to provide cooling to the building is a chiller. The current system is what's called a DX unit. We have multiple DX units, and they are getting close to 30 years. We've rebuilt them at certain times during their lifetime. It's not the most efficient way to provide cooling. We're still assessing whether that's an option we'd want to go. We do have a price actually for DX units replacement, and that's closer to the $500,000 mark. Obviously, the technology has changed, so we're looking at different options there. But we wanted to give you an example of a project that would cost more than the $600,000 that we typically spend. So that's why we plugged it in there for right now.
Okay. I
So,
remember our discussions from time past, and it wasn't at that level of zeros.
It was not. What we found as we got into the study of it was that you have to replace all the coils and everything because the technology has changed with the gas that you use to cool things. And so now that requires you to basically replace the chiller bundle in the individual air handler units. And that drove the cost up by essentially double.
Yeah, and my intent was not to dive into your preliminary draft there, but I just saw a lot of zeros, so.
It got our attention as well.
Okay. Anna, do you have a question of Andy?
Yeah, I had a quick question. Thanks, Steve. So I want to make sure I understand this too, and your explanation has been really helpful regarding how this fund is helpful. My question is, obviously some of the background information suggests that we will lose state aid as we spend funds above a certain dollar amount per student. Right now, is that $600,000 the magic number where we're not losing state aid? And if we exceed that, then we start to lose state aid? Or if we drop that $600,000 down even more, are we losing less state aid? I just want to understand that continuum.
So negative tertiary aid is on our total expenditures, not just the $600,000.
Okay.
And what it means is, at some point in time, I'd love talking about this. Probably not the best forum for it, but basically the value of assessed value behind each student in Oregon has finally crested above a certain amount that the state of Wisconsin has said, okay, now you move into negative tertiary aid, and as you spend additional dollars for anything, you're going to lose a little part of your state aid because you are more property wealthy. And so that's the situation that I probably told Mr. Zock that eventually we were going to hit 20 years ago when I began, and we actually finally unfortunately hit it this last year. It does cut both ways though, because it does mean that there's more property wealth in the district behind each student. So we are the second to last school district in Dane County to hit that threshold. So it's not like we're alone or have done anything incorrect or wrong. It's just the way the state aid formula works.
Thank you. That answers the question perfectly.
Good. Anybody else have any questions?
I do. Can you hear me? It's Krista.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding. With a capital project, we would now have three options to pay for it. We could use our current capital recurring maintenance budget of $600,000. We could develop this Fund 46, which basically allows us to take operating funds, put it in a trust fund for future use, or we could put a capital project within a referendum. Is that right?
It is. What I would suggest that we would do is have only two options. Once we get through that fifth year, we would probably take that $600,000 and just put it into the fund, and then just operate the capital maintenance projects out of that fund. So in one particular year, we might only have $300,000 of projects, and then the next year we might have $900,000 worth of projects. It would just give us that flexibility. And then you always have the ability to go to referendum if you need to.
Okay, so then that was my next question. So in a year, we could build the recurring referendum fund budget for that year and say, we're going to spend 300,000 of it. We're going to put 300,000 in Fund 46.
Yep, you could.
We're allowed to do that. Okay, so
Yep.
we don't necessarily have to fund Fund 46 from operating all the time. We could take the recurring capital referendum or maintenance money and put it in Fund 46.
Absolutely.
Because I just want to make sure that we're not funding this capital fund with operating all the time. So I wanted to make sure that that was kosher.
Yep.
And then what would you say our goal would be for a Fund 46?
I think it really depends on as we develop the long-term plan, trying to find a number that's sustainable. Keep in mind that we have had $600,000 in long-term capital projects for the last 10 years. And we are adding a 7th building, 8th if you look at the pool. And so it might be something that we want to grow over time. We don't have to, but if we can down the road, we might want to think about putting a little bit more money into it than the 600,000. But that's totally up to us on a year-to-year basis.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful.
Any other questions?
Question, Andy.
I have a question following up on Krista's. Andy, is there a maximum size of a project that you could fund with Fund 46 before you'd have to go to a referendum?
Not that I can see in the statute anywhere. I think you could go. I wouldn't say, for instance, let's try to build a school or anything like that. But no, you could have a multi-million-dollar project pretty easily, I think, if you needed to.
A major renovation or an addition or something like that. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question as well.
Tim?
Andy, in terms of things like chillers and roofs, I know that, heating systems, chillers, roofs, very traditional technology and relatively predictable cost and life cycle. We're obviously investing in some new things. It's not just a roof anymore, because if we need to replace a roof, most of our roofs are covered in solar panels. And so the replacement of a roof isn't the replacement of a roof anymore for those buildings. And then the newer technology that we've invested in as well, solar panels, the wells that are going in and the equipment that operates those wells, very different technology with very typically, I would imagine, different life cycles than what we're used to. And so I would imagine that those are going to require a more accelerated replacement. They're more consumable than roofs and chillers. Have we looked ahead to see how a roof project is different than a roof project used to be, considering what we've put on our roofs lately?
So one of the things that to some degree it was intentional. We have kind of a hybrid system of roofs, right? At the high school, the solar panels are actually elevated above the roof. So you could replace the roof without having to touch the solar panels. At the middle school, it's on a standing seam metal roof, which should last for a very long time. We have had no issues with that. However, at the new school and at Brooklyn, we are on a conventional rubber roof. Now we've tried to enhance those roofs to the degree possible so that they have about at least a 20-year lifespan, which is the same lifespan as the solar panels. So the intent is that as those lifespans end, they end hopefully close to the same time. So that's been intentional on our part. And the technology continues to change. I think you've heard me talking about with solar panels. You almost would want to probably, if we continue on the curve. I wouldn't say it's Moore's law, but it's pretty good, where those solar panels continue to get more and more efficient as you go. So 20 years down the road, you probably want to consider replacing them anyhow, just because there is a little bit of a decline in the amount of power that they produce, but the new technology is going to be so much better too. So you talked about geothermal. To my knowledge, and I should look into this, I am not aware of the tubes that go into the ground 400 feet plus having any type of a expiration, but I should look into that. My guess is they will probably last as long as the building. Your pumps, which push the glycol into the ground, will definitely have to be replaced. But we replace pumps all the time, and you can replace parts of pumps so that they continue to work. And we actually have backup pumps for each of those geothermal systems. So as one dies, there's one that's immediately available to take over, and then we replace the one that has the mechanical problems.
Got it. Along with that new technology for traditional heating and cooling, things like that, John talked about technology in general. And there's going to be a significant cost there. I would imagine, Chromebooks are $200-300 a piece at a minimum, and the cost to not just maintain them, but support them. Is that something else that can be put into Fund 46? Because I would imagine those are going to be replaced more often than we've been used to as well.
I'd have to research that. I'm not specifically, it has in my mind been more of a building thing, but let me look into that for you. Perhaps that would fit. We can definitely explore that.
Okay. That's it for me.
Any other comments or questions of Andy on Fund 46 proposal? Andy, do we have to have an approved plan, much like is in your spreadsheet, when we adopt Fund 46?
Yeah, so my intent would be, if you are open to this, we would bring it June 15th. We'd bring either one agenda item with 2 approvals or 2 agenda items, one for the approved capital plan and then one for the resolution to establish the fund.
Okay. Good. And then I don't see any financial downside to this.
No, all it is an additional financial tool for us.
Okay. Does anybody have any heartburn with going ahead on the 15th for this, or real serious questions about it? So I don't want Andy to spend any time on it if the board has any heartburn, but I haven't heard that yet.
This is Krista. My only initial heartburn was about not knowing that it could be funded with the recurring maintenance referendum, and it would only be funded from Fund 10. So now that I know that that's not there, I feel very confident about it.
Good. Great, Andy. I think you've got a go ahead then, and we'll put that on the agenda for further consideration on our June 15th meeting.
Sounds good. If anybody has any ideas or things that pop in their head between now and then, please feel free to contact me.
All right, we're going to F4. Thanks, Andy. That was really informative. Good process forward. F4, Forest Edge Elementary update. Brian.
This is just a quick update in terms of the elementary school that is ahead of schedule and on budget. If you were standing on the sidewalk in front of the school, on your right-hand side would be the east portion of the building. On your left-hand side would be the west portion. And if you recall from our tour, the building is being constructed and finished internally from east to west. In the past couple of weeks, Findorf and the contractors have made a connection for the permanent power to the facility. The geothermal piping was filled with the magic fluid to heat and cool the building. In the weeks ahead, most of the work will be on the east end, including the gym floor, the kitchen equipment, and the cafeteria painting and sealing. We would be delighted to take you on another tour if and when the safe at home order is lifted and we're able to have a group, so you could see it again in June or July. And I'll work with Dr. Bergstrom and Steve and look at a couple of dates. So I don't have a lot of additional information to share, but I wanted to get on your radar screen that we would love to get the board back for a tour in the month of June or July.
And all signs point on budget?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Brian, just out of curiosity, I see that the daycare out in front is moving along at a very similar place. When do you expect that they are going to open?
It's our understanding that they would be ready in concert with what 3 months ago we would have said would be a normal school year and a September 1 opening.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Drive out there, it's just amazing how it looks, and the progress on Terra Vesta is incredible. There are 2 more houses up every time I drive by there, it seems like.
Steve, I've got a quick question, not necessarily related to construction of Forest Edge, but placement at Forest Edge. I don't know if that's part of a upcoming superintendent's report regarding where we are with 5th and 6th grade enrollment. I know according to the schedule, exemption letters are due next week. I'm just curious to know a kind of a status update on where we feel that is relative to placement. And I don't want to, it's not really this agenda item, it's a construction update. So we don't have to answer it today. I'd like to know where that stands.
Leslie?
Well, it's difficult to give any specific numbers right now because the process is really just starting as far as parents handing in their exemption letters. But I think one thing we could do, in addition to having a full report at the next board meeting, would be to put whatever updates we have in our weekly letter.
That would be great. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions of Brian? Okay. Moving on to open enrollment update. Gina, you're up.
All right, so the purpose of this update is to let you know where we are with open enrollment for next school year. As you know, the board sets open enrollment spaces annually at the January board meeting. Wisconsin law provides that after those spaces are set, that the board cannot decrease the number of spaces. However, there is a provision in the administrative code that would allow the board to open more spaces. And typically we do that in June. That is a statutory date that is set by the legislature. So this year, the legislature passed new legislation which extended each of those deadlines for open enrollment for a month. So now we can add additional spaces after July 2nd. And if you look at the board purple, I put a chart with the new dates in there. Open enrollment applications used to be due April 30th. This year, they are now due May 29th. And the first day we can act on those is June 1st. So in terms of letting you know where we are, table 1 we put together just to let you know what the board did decide in January. And you will see in column E the number of spaces that the board said were available for open enrollment. And then just to let you know where we are as of May 6th, in table 2, you will see that for each of our grade levels that we had more applications received than we set space for. So we truly are a destination district. And then I put in column E the difference. I did separate the high school because we have 50 spaces open and we had 16 applications received. So that would be the one grade level where we have enough space for all of the applications. So I wanted to let you know this update because we did talk at our last board meeting about budgeting based on additional open enrollment spaces. Now we are still getting applications in, so these are not going to be the final numbers, but it does look like there is interest, particularly in 4K and kindergarten, which has been typical in the years that I have been here. Now, typically, I would say not everyone who applies comes to the district. We notify students of their acceptance based on the district, not of the school location. And so sometimes if residents or non-residents, I should say, want a particular school and we don't have space at that school, then they determine not to come. Under the law, they can apply for up to 3 schools. So they may apply to Oregon, but then decide to go to, let's say, Verona instead. But the good news about the state law change is every public school is operating under the same deadline. And I would say we usually get at least half, if not more, of the students who apply that are then accepted. So in terms of enrollment, I would say we are right on track for the budget report that we did last time based on increasing spaces by 35 students. Because if you'll remember in the original budget estimate, we had said no net increase in students.
It
So
looks
we're-
like, Gina, it looks like we'll have more budgetary flexibility if we want to loosen open enrollment spaces even more in July.
That's my assumption, and I suspect that we will come to you with a request to open more spaces. Of course, we are always sensitive to monitor our class sizes and to make sure that we are serving all of our students. So I am somewhat happy that we are waiting until July because we should have much firmer section numbers and growth numbers by that standpoint. I do understand that it's a long time for some families to wait as to where their child is going to go to school in the fall, but we'll be in that same boat with other K-12 public schools.
Any questions of Gina on the open enrollment report? Otherwise, we'll hear from Gina in July.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thanks. That takes us to superintendent report.
Board members, Dr. Bergstrom and I are going to tag team this, and she is going to go first with part A, and then I will follow up with part B. Leslie, you have the floor.
Your mic's off.
Nope.
Your mic is off.
There we go. Sorry, guys. So the first thing I'd like to speak about tonight is we made some, reached out and made contact with Mark Roppers regarding what he is seeing related to growth due to the fact that we're in such an unusual situation. So we reached out to him in late April, and Mark said that he was just about to do the same to us. And so he provided a little bit of information because after our conversation, he reached out to his contacts in both Oregon and Fitchburg. And in both cases, he was told that the building of homes is still moving forward quite steadily. And at this point, contractors are not seeing an imminent slowdown. However, he would say in general, we are probably at least a year behind the projections that he did for us back in 2017. Now, he said that the Oregon and Fitchburg contacts that he spoke to were slightly more optimistic than the ones that he spoke to in other parts of the area, because overall, he said that while construction of new homes and new residential developments are moving forward, it has been a drop in 2020 compared to the last few years. And of course, he's saying that anything that he tells any of us is contingent on there not being a severe and significant economic spiral. That, of course, is a possibility given the circumstances that we're in. But the big message is, I think, for our knowledge, is that currently the building is moving forward in both the Oregon and Fitchburg markets. So before I move forward, because I have a couple of other things, does anybody want to ask anything about that?
Okay, go ahead.
All right. So then the next thing I want to mention is the fact that we're in the midst of contingency planning for the fall, because we understand that There is always the possibility that there could be face-to-face school as we have known it to be in the past. But there's also the understanding that it could be face-to-face with rolling closures based on what happens in the future. Or we could end up with a modified schedule that would bring students to school on staggered day 1, day 2 schedules to ensure small class sizes. So we are putting together committees to look at all the different aspects of how the school district is run and how it would be impacted by any of those scenarios. And we are using not only what others are doing across the country and in other nations, but some school reopening roadmaps that have been provided by various organizations to sort of guide our thinking and make sure we're not missing anything. So as mentioned previously, John will facilitate an academic planning committee that will start in the next few weeks. That will include an examination of systems that we need to ensure we're meeting our students where they are when they return to us and providing them with proper and appropriate academic and social emotional supports, making decisions regarding common platform, single sign-on, etc. And then any accompanying professional development related to what we anticipate our needs, our student needs will be. Then there will also be a safety committee, and that safety committee will be subdivided. A health and wellness section to think about protocols, and a transportation section because there will need to be at least a couple of different transportation scenarios ready to go. In both cases, the committees that are happening will be facilitated by district office, but they will have principal and teacher membership, as well as a lot of opportunities for input from school leadership teams, because we really want to have a lot of people involved in the planning process. We think that's what will give us the strongest, most comprehensive sets of plans, because honestly, we will need multiple sets of plans. So the safety committee will start its work the second week in June. And they're beginning preliminary actions right now also, just ensuring that if there's something that we need to do immediately and not wait until June, that we're getting a jump start on it. One more section from me, and then I'll pass the baton. So is there any questions, or are there questions related to contingency planning?
Okay.
Okay.
Don't hear anything, Leslie.
All right, then here's the next one. And that is, we have done the selection of our administrative interns for the fall. It was a very exciting process because we had such wonderful internal candidates, and we had some great external ones also. And we all know the value of this program, because if you look at your Google Meet screen right now, you can see Carrie and Dawn Golds and Darcy Krieger and Anna Seidenstricker were all at one time interns, or Anna is, but won't be starting July 1st. So we know that it's really important to keep this program going because it's providing us with leaders, building leaders that are very important, because with fewer people going into education, that means fewer people going into educational leadership. So with no further ado, one of our interns next year will be Lindsay Engelhart from Netherwood Knoll. She's an Oregon graduate and an Edgewood College graduate, and is currently a first grade teacher at Netherwood. And there are many examples of her leadership in the short time that she's been with us. So we're really excited that she will be joining the intern team. In addition, because we have, believe it or not, we have 4 spots this year. Katie Anderson is a teacher who was with us this year on an interim contract. She had been in Minnesota an assistant special education director and a physical education and adaptive physical education teacher. And she moved to the area and took an interim position with us, and she developed a reputation as a very calm and strong student connector. So she will be one of our interns. And as well, we've, for the first time in quite a while, also selected an external candidate, a young woman named Maria Rock. Maria is the PBIS coach from a neighboring district, and she has previously served students as a special education and general education teacher at the elementary level. And she is just about to graduate from UW-Madison with a master's in leadership and policy analysis. We're really excited to bring her expertise to our district. And you may or may not remember that in November, we also hired Jessica Erdahl, a third grade teacher at Brooklyn, to be our administrative intern. And so she will be joining Mary Hermes, who is currently serving her second year as an intern at Prairie View. And Stephanie Snyder-Knudsen will be going back to the classroom after having served as an intern for several years, and her future students are very, very lucky. So that is an administrative intern update for you.
Thank you, Leslie. Okay, I'm going to buzz through a couple of items. I'll take your questions at the end. Item number 1 is please know and remember that we continue to educate our students in this new environment. And it is a learning experience for our students, our families, as well as our staff. We are going to make some mistakes along the way, but overall, it has been a positive move forward, given the times that we face. The second item, I had a conversation with Mr. Pleiner last week about Honors Night, which was scheduled for this Wednesday. It has been rescheduled for Tuesday, May 26th, and it will be live streamed in a virtual setting. My next item, I believe Anna Seidenstrecker is online. Anna, would you say a few words so your picture can pop up?
Hello.
A few more. There you go. All right, board members and colleagues that are watching right now. Anna graduated from UW-Madison with her master's degree this past weekend, so we are exceedingly proud of her with that accomplishment. Here, we'll give her a round of applause. She has worked out just the way one would expect. Dr. Bergstrom mentioned a couple of folks that started out as administrative interns and worked their way into an associate principal and ultimately a principal position. Anna's going to be at RCI next year as an associate principal, and we are exceedingly proud of her. So congratulations. I'm sure I'm in hot water for putting you on the spot, but that's okay. We are proud of your work, and congratulations on this past weekend's graduation.
Thank you.
2 more quick items. Very late in the day, I received a telephone call from a colleague and learned that the Department of Public Instruction is going to provide us with some information on summer school 2020 sometime during this week. My friend jokingly said, well, maybe it's Friday at about 5:30 p.m. And I said, no, I'm more optimistic than that we will get it earlier. So that what we've planned so far with summer school 2020 should fit well, but as we get more direction, we'll share that with the board and with our community. And then the last item, we have a school closeout team for this year. That may sound odd. We always have a school closeout team. It's usually done at the building level, but this year Andy is heading it up to make sure that we address important things such as how do we get materials back to students, how do we allow staff to have access, and how do we bring conclusion to what has become over the last couple of months a new experience for us working in a virtual environment. So with that, I'll stop and see if you have any questions. Okay, thank you, board members.
Thank you. Future agenda. We will not have a meeting on May 25th, that being Memorial Day. We were going to have a work session tonight, kind of a board orientation general session, but with the large agenda that became not feasible. So we're looking at establishing our May 26th date, where we were going to have an in-person in-service and do an hour and 15-minute session virtually on the 26th. So kind of plan on that. If you have problems with that date, send me an email. Okay, otherwise it looks like Leslie and I are going to work through kind of what that session looks like for the 26th. That will not replace a more general session that's being established by visioning at some point in time when we can get together in person. This is just more of a board operational thing. Then that means our next regular meeting is June 8th, which is our second meeting, but we were talking, Brian and I were talking about maybe moving that to the 15th because we will only have one meeting that month typically. So we're looking at moving the meeting from June 8th to the 15th. So kind of plan on that. And we've talked about a number of items that will have to be on the agenda that evening, including the establishment of our new fund. So if people have a problem with moving to the 15th, let me know. Otherwise, I think Brian and I are going to work on moving the 8th to the 15th, which means we've got a long break in between then. And I think if we need anything emergency wise between now and then, we can call a special meeting. Any agenda items? Krista, I've got your message about agenda items and I'm working on that. So I understand that. We're going to try to fit that in where appropriate, and I'll be in touch with you about scheduling that. Anybody else have ideas on the agenda or any issues on the agenda for the future?
Steve,
Yeah.
I just wanted to see if we could add a little bit more on the assessment topic of closing out, this year and how next year will be affected based on where our learners are at the end of this year.
Okay. We'll probably get some information in between now and then, through our in-betweener stuff, but we'll continue to have an update on the distance learning, and that would be a component that Leslie and John should have addressed.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll go through checkup, but when we go to our closed session, we're going to close out this meeting and we've got another meeting invite. And are we going over? Okay. So check out anybody. I'm going to go through my list. Heather, you're on the screen, so you can go first. Anything for checkout tonight?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks.
Kevin?
Not for me.
Anna?
Nope.
Okay. Tim?
No, I just want to hand it to Leslie, Dr. Bussler, and the leadership teams. The very level-handed way that you are handling all of these changes is really quite admirable. And so I just can't even imagine how your world has been turned upside down other than what we see in our regular board meetings. So I just really want to recognize all the work that's happening behind the scenes, because I can only imagine it's an enormous endeavor.
Thank you, Tim. I think that's a sentiment that all the board members share. Troy?
The only thing I would say is a big thank you to Cubby and Jenna for their work and input on the graduation rescheduling. That was really helpful for me to hear their perspective, and obviously that's a very important thing for our seniors. But I really appreciated hearing that firsthand. So thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. And I don't have anything. So board, let's take about a few minutes. We've got to transfer over into that room here at the Innovation Center. So give it a couple of minutes and then sign in, and we'll meet you there to entertain a motion to go into closed session subject to my announcement of the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. So we'll see you in a few minutes.